Story 1. The Bridge on County Road 47. The GPS had died 3 miles back, leaving Marcus with nothing but the fading daylight and a single-lane road that seemed to fold in on itself. He'd been driving for 6 hours straight, trying to make it to his sister's wedding rehearsal dinner, and now he was hopelessly lost somewhere in rural Indiana. The bridge appeared suddenly, an old concrete underpass that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance since the Eisenhower administration. Marcus slowed the car, his headlights cutting through the gathering dusk. Something about the structure made his stomach turn, the way the shadows pooled beneath it, thick and somehow wrong, like they had substance. He stopped the car about 50 feet from the entrance. His rational mind screamed at him to just drive through, but something primitive in his brainstem was pulling the emergency brake. Through the windshield, he could see the tunnel stretching maybe 100 feet, the other side visible as a pale circle of dying light. That's when he saw the face. It was smiling at him from the darkness beneath the bridge's overhang, pale as moonlight on bone. At first, Marcus thought it might be graffiti, some local kid's idea of a prank. But then he realized the face was moving, breathing, the smile widening as he watched. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, his hand fumbling for the gear shift. The face tilted, studying him with that impossibly wide grin. It looked almost friendly, almost human, with round cheeks and gentle eyes. Something about it reminded Marcus of those old cartoons his grandmother used to watch, all soft edges and innocent wonder. He laughed nervously. Maybe it was just some weird art installation. Maybe he was more exhausted than he thought. His hand relaxed on the gear shift. The face's smile grew wider. Marcus put the car in drive and pressed the gas pedal gently. The vehicle rolled forward, entering the cool shadow of the underpass. The temperature dropped immediately, and his breath fogged in the sudden cold. The face watched him approach, that smile never faltering, never blinking. He was halfway through the tunnel when the face lifted. Marcus's scream caught in his throat as he saw what was beneath. A gaping skeletal maw that seemed to unhinge like a snake's, lined with hundreds of needle-thin teeth that glistened with something dark and viscous. The eyes above the true mouth were dead things, black pits that reflected nothing, absorbed everything. The body came next, uncoiling from the shadows with a sound like wet leather being dragged across concrete. It was impossibly long, segmented like a worm, but covered in pale, almost translucent skin that showed the shadow of bones and organs beneath. The thing had been compressed somehow, folded into spaces that shouldn't have held it, and now it was expanding. Marcus slammed the accelerator to the floor. The engine roared, tires squealing on the damp concrete, but the creature was faster than physics should have allowed. The massive body whipped forward with the speed of a striking cobra, and suddenly, Marcus's world was nothing but that skeletal mouth growing larger, the teeth gleaming, the throat beyond dark as oblivion. The car's front end crumpled like tinfoil as it struck the creature's lower jaw. The windshield exploded inward, showering Marcus with glass. He felt something wrap around the vehicle. That impossibly long body, coiling, squeezing. Metal screamed. The roof buckled. His door compressed inward, crushing his left arm against his ribs. He heard bones snap, felt the hot explosion of pain. Through his fragmenting consciousness, Marcus saw the teeth descending. They punched through the remaining windshield like hypodermic needles, each one as thick as his finger and sharp enough to part flesh without resistance. One pierced his shoulder, another his thigh. He felt them sliding deeper, felt the creature's throat muscles beginning their work, pulling, dragging him forward through the wreckage of his car. The pain was transcendent. Each tooth was a separate agony, pinning him in place as the body contracted, pulling him toward that waiting gullet. His functioning hand scrabbled uselessly at the dashboard, at the seat, at anything that might anchor him to this world. His fingers found the steering wheel and gripped it with the strength of absolute terror. For a moment he held on. The creature's pulling intensified, and Marcus felt his skin begin to tear, to separate from the muscle beneath. The teeth were hooks now, barbed and cruel, and they would either bring him into that mouth or they would tear him apart, trying. His grip faltered, his fingers slipped. The last thing Marcus saw before he slid into the darkness of that throat was his phone, still sitting in the cup holder, screen illuminated with a text from his sister. "Where are you? We're all waiting." The creature swallowed him whole in 4 convulsive gulps, car and all. By the time the next driver came through 3 hours later, the underpass was empty and quiet. Just a few pieces of broken glass glinting in the headlights, and a strange smell, like copper and concrete dust, that didn't quite belong. The driver didn't stop. Something about the bridge made them accelerate instead, gripping the wheel tighter, not questioning the instinct that made them hold their breath until they'd passed completely through. In the darkness above, hidden in the maintenance space where the support beams met the road surface, something long and pale shifted position, settling back into waiting stillness. The false face reformed, smooth and innocent, ready to smile at the next curious visitor, ready to wait. Story 2, The Bowling Alley. The TikTok challenge had seemed stupid when Sarah first saw it. Break into an abandoned building, find the creepiest room, and film yourself staying there for 5 minutes. But $500 was $500. And the abandoned Ashwa Lanes bowling alley had been sitting empty since before she was born. Easy money. She'd convinced Marcus and Jen to come along, promising to split the prize 3 ways. They'd cut the fence behind the building at 2 a.m., squeezing through the gap in their dark hoodies, phones out, and ready to capture content. The place was worse inside than out. Decades of water damage had turned the walls into abstract art pieces of mold and rot. The lanes themselves were warped and splitting, dotted with mushrooms growing from the waterlogged wood. Everything smelled like mildew and something else, something sweet and wrong, like fruit left too long in summer heat. "This is perfect," Sarah whispered, panning her camera across the destruction. "Creepy as hell. We'll be done in..." "Guys," Marcus's voice cut through the darkness. "Look at this." He was standing near the back hallway, where the bathrooms and party rooms used to be. His flashlight illuminated a door Sarah didn't remember seeing in any of the photos she'd researched. It was too clean, for one thing. No water damage, no graffiti, no rust on the handle. The wood looked almost polished, gleaming dully in the light. "That's weird," Jen said, moving closer. "Everything else is trashed, but that door looks brand new." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. "Maybe we should just film out here. I mean, we've got plenty of creepy footage already." But Marcus was already reaching for the handle. "Come on, this is exactly what the challenge is about. Creepiest room, remember?" The door swung open silently, without the squeal of rusted hinges Sarah had expected. Beyond was darkness, not the natural darkness of an unlit room, but something deeper, something that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams without reflecting them back. "Holy shit," Marcus breathed. "Look at that." Sarah moved closer, despite every instinct screaming at her to run. The door frame was wrong somehow, too thick, and as her light played across it, she realized the wood had a texture that made her stomach flip. It looked almost organic, like stretched skin, and was it breathing? The surface seemed to expand and contract ever so slightly, pulsing with a rhythm that was too slow to be human, but definitely alive. The room beyond the door wasn't a room at all. It was a mouth. The walls were lined with teeth, hundreds, thousands of them stretching back into the impossible distance. They weren't monster teeth or animal fangs, they were human teeth, perfectly formed, gleaming white, set into gums that glistened wetly in the light. The teeth covered every surface, floor, ceiling, walls, creating a tunnel of enamel that receded into absolute darkness. "Oh, fuck," Jen whispered. "Oh, fuck. Oh, fuck. Oh." The smell hit them then. It was overwhelming, a wave of rot and digestive juices and something else, something chemical and wrong that burned the inside of Sarah's nose and made her eyes water. It was the smell of a stomach, of the inside of something vast and hungry. Marcus took a step back, but it was already too late. The door frame flexed, the flesh around it contracting like a sphincter muscle. The teeth began to chatter, a sound like castanets played by 1,000 tiny hands, creating a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. And from deep within that tunnel of teeth, something made a sound, not a roar or a growl, but a gurgle, a digestive rumble from something impossibly large. Sarah grabbed Marcus's arm, trying to pull him back, but he was frozen, staring into that mouth with the blank expression of someone whose mind had simply checked out. His phone had slipped from his fingers, clattering to the floor, still recording as it spun. The suction started slowly. Sarah felt it as a gentle tug, like a breeze pulling toward the open door. Then it intensified. The air itself seemed to be rushing past them, flowing into that impossible mouth with increasing force. Loose papers and debris from the hallway lifted into the air, swirling like a tornado before being pulled through the doorway and disappearing into the darkness. Jen screamed and grabbed onto a support pillar, her fingers white-knuckled against the rotting wood. Sarah was still holding Marcus's arm, but he was sliding forward, his feet scraping against the floor as the suction intensified. She wrapped her other arm around a broken pinball machine, feeling the metal cut into her skin as she held on. "Marcus," she screamed, "fight it!" But Marcus wasn't fighting anything. He was walking forward now voluntarily, his eyes locked on something deep within the tunnel of teeth. Sarah's grip on his arm slipped, her sweaty fingers losing purchase, and then he was free, moving toward the doorway with slow, dreamlike steps. The teeth parted as he approached, the ones on the floor retracting slightly to create a clear path. Sarah could see them pulsing, undulating, preparing to close around him. She lunged forward, trying to grab him again, but the suction caught her full force, and she found herself being dragged along the floor, fingers scrabbling uselessly against the water-damaged wood. Marcus stepped across the threshold. The teeth snapped shut behind him with a sound like a gunshot, and suddenly the suction stopped. Sarah collapsed, gasping, tears streaming down her face. The door was still open, the tunnel of teeth still visible, but Marcus was gone, not consumed, not chewed, just gone as if he'd stepped through into another dimension entirely. "We have to close it," Jen was saying over and over. "We have to close the door. We have to close..." But Sarah was staring at the teeth, at the way they were still moving, still pulsing. And then she saw it. Among the thousands of human teeth tucked into the gums near the back was something else. A phone case. Then another. And was that, Jesus Christ, was that a sneaker? A wallet? This thing had been here for a while. This thing had been feeding for a while. The teeth began to chatter again, and Sarah felt the suction start anew. She scrambled backward, slamming into Jen, and together they ran. They didn't stop running until they were through the fence, in Jen's car, tires squealing as they pulled away from Ashwa Lanes and everything it contained. They called the police from a gas station 20 miles away, told them everything. The cops went to investigate, found the building exactly as abandoned as it was supposed to be. No clean door, no room full of teeth, no sign of Marcus. But Jen still had the video. In the shaky footage, you can see Marcus step through the doorway. You can see the teeth. And if you listen very carefully, under the sound of their screaming, you can hear something else, a wet, satisfied, swallowing sound, and then a belch that echoes like it's coming from miles away. Sarah still has nightmares about those teeth, about the way they looked so perfectly human, so normal, set in that impossible mouth. She dreams that every doorway is the same doorway, that every room is the same room, that the thing behind the smile is still hungry, still waiting. Story 3: The Maternity Ward. Detective Linda Morrison had seen a lot of crime scenes in her 20 years on the force, but the apartment on Oleander Street made her stomach turn in a way she couldn't quite articulate. It wasn't the violence. There was none. It wasn't blood. The place was spotless. It was the absence. 2 adults, gone. 1 teenage daughter, vanished. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, no blood, no evidence of foul play. Just empty rooms and a lingering smell that Linda couldn't quite place. Something like formaldehyde and baby powder mixed with burnt plastic. The TV was still on, tuned to static. That detail stuck with Linda for some reason. Who leaves a TV on a dead channel? "Detective," Officer Chen called from the master bedroom. "You need to see this." The bedroom was as pristine as the rest of the apartment, except for the walls. Every inch of them was covered in crayon drawings, crude, childlike scribbles done in pink. Not the daughter's work. She was 16, and these were drawn by someone with a much younger hand, or something trying to mimic one. The drawings showed the same figure over and over again. A massive, grotesque baby, bulbous and malformed, with 2 long limbs and sunken eyes. In each picture, the thing was larger, as if the artist had been tracking its growth. And in the final drawing, done on the ceiling above the bed, the thing was smiling, its body filling the entire frame, with small stick figures trapped inside its belly. "Jesus," Chen whispered. "Kid stuff?" But Linda was already shaking her head, studying the drawings more closely. The crayon marks were wrong, too deep, gouged into the drywall rather than simply marking it. And the pink color, She scraped at it with her fingernail, and her stomach lurched. It wasn't crayon at all. It was dried something else, something organic, waxy and fleshy and wrong. Her phone buzzed. Text from the lab. Residue from the apartment. Organic compound, unknown origin. Matches samples from the Mercy General Maternity Ward fire, 1982. Linda's blood went cold. She'd heard about that fire, though it was long before her time. An entire hospital wing had burned, except for the maternity ward hood, which had somehow remained completely intact and undamaged, while everything around it was destroyed. The ward had been sealed off afterward, deemed structurally unsafe, never restored or even properly investigated. She'd driven past the old Mercy General building 1,000 times. The burned-out husk had been abandoned for over 40 years, a landmark of urban decay that the city kept meaning to demolish but never quite got around to. The maternity ward was still visible from the street, a single intact wing jutting from the destroyed structure like a rotten tooth. "Chen," she said quietly, "get a warrant for the old Mercy General building and call backup, lots of backup." They went in at dawn, 8 officers plus a K-9 unit. The building was worse than Linda had imagined. Structural collapse everywhere, exposed rebar, floors that crumbled under their weight. But the maternity ward was exactly as it had been left in 1982, paint peeling but intact. Gurneys rusted but still standing. And at the end of the main hallway, the nursery door stood slightly ajar. Linda pushed it open with her flashlight, her other hand on her sidearm. The nursery was enormous, far larger than the building's exterior suggested was possible. The walls receded into shadow that her flashlight couldn't quite penetrate, and everywhere, were bassinets, hundreds of them, arranged in perfect rows, each one containing a pink, malformed bundle. "Holy Mother of..." Chen started, but Linda cut him off with a raised hand. The bundles were breathing. Each one rose and fell with slow, wet respirations that filled the room with a rhythmic, organic sound like a massive lung inflating and deflating. And they were moving, shifting, within their blankets, small fingers, too many fingers, gripping the edges of the bassinets. Linda took a step back, and her boot heel struck something soft. She looked down and immediately wished she hadn't. It was a police badge, corroded and ancient, half buried in a pile of what looked like skin, dried, cracked, empty skin, like a shed snake's molt, but human-shaped. "Everyone out," she whispered. "Now." But the door had closed behind them, not slammed, not locked, just gently swung shut with the slow inevitability of a trap closing. The light from the hallway vanished, leaving only their flashlights to push back the dark. The breathing sound intensified. And then the bassinets began to tip over. The things inside weren't babies. They looked like babies the way a sculpture looks like a person, technically correct, but fundamentally wrong. Their skin was too pink, too smooth, stretched over bodies that were bloated and malformed. Their eyes were sunken holes that wept a clear fluid. Their mouths opened in silent screams that revealed gums with too many teeth, baby teeth grown to adult size, sharp and hungry. They hit the floor with wet, meaty sounds and immediately began to grow, their bodies expanding like time-lapse footage of rotting fruit, swelling and distending, limbs elongating, heads tilting at angles that should have snapped necks. Within seconds, they were the size of toddlers, then children, crawling toward the officers with movements that were simultaneously too fast and too slow, jerky and smooth, a nauseating combination that made Linda's eyes hurt to track. Someone fired. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, and one of the creatures exploded in a shower of pink flesh and clear fluid that smelled like hospitals and death. But there were dozens more, hundreds more, climbing over each other in their eagerness to reach the officers. Linda ran. They all ran, deeper into the nursery, away from the growing mass of pink bodies and grasping hands. The room seemed to stretch forever, the shadows deepening, the bassinets multiplying. Chen was beside her, gasping, and then he was screaming, and then he was gone, pulled backward into a mass of writhing pink that swallowed him whole. Linda kept running. The others fell one by one, their screams cutting off with wet finality. She didn't look back, couldn't look back. Her only thought was the exit. Had to reach the exit, had to get out, had to... The wall ahead shimmered and became static. Not a TV screen showing static, but actual static. The crackling electronic snow forming a barrier between her and escape. Linda skidded to a halt, her flashlight beam fragmenting into 1,000 tiny pixels as it hit the static barrier. And through the static, stepping from it like someone walking through a beaded curtain, it emerged. The pink man was at least 15 feet tall, possibly larger. The shadows made it hard to judge. Its body was that of a grotesquely oversized infant, skin the color of raw meat, stretched so tight it was translucent in places. She could see things moving underneath, organs and bones and things that might have been smaller versions of itself, gestating within its bulk. Its face was a horror, eyes sunken so deep they were practically inverted. Nose a collapsed ruin, mouth a gaping maw that drooled the same clear fluid the smaller things had wept. But worst of all were its hands. They were almost normal-sized, baby hands with tiny, perfect fingers, completely out of proportion with the rest of its massive body. And as Linda watched in paralyzed horror, those baby hands reached for her with gentle, almost tender movements. She fired every round in her clip. Each bullet punched through the thing's body, leaving holes that oozed pink fluid but didn't slow it down. The pink man just kept coming, stepping closer with movements that seemed to glitch and stutter, like a corrupted video file trying to play. The hands closed around her. Despite their small size, their grip was ironclad, inhuman. Linda felt herself being lifted, pulled toward that gaping mouth, and she realized with crystal clarity that she wasn't going to be eaten. This thing didn't eat. It absorbed. She would become part of it, part of the pink man, another layer of skin, another forgotten soul trapped in its ever-growing mass. The static rushed in from all sides, filling her vision, filling her ears with white noise. She felt herself coming apart, dissolving. Her consciousness fragmenting into a million tiny pieces. The last thing she heard before she disappeared completely was the sound of a baby crying, a sound that was also laughter, also screaming, also the white noise of empty channels searching forever for a signal that would never come. The next morning, the demolition crew that arrived to finally tear down Mercy General found the building already collapsed. The maternity ward was gone, as if it had never existed. But in the rubble, they found badges. 8 of them, corroded and ancient-looking though. The metal was modern steel, and the names on them belonged to the officers who'd gone in just hours before. The pink man was gone. But somewhere on dead channels between channels, in the static space where signals go to die, 8 people were screaming, and they would scream forever, trapped in the growing belly of something that had been forgotten once, but would never be forgotten again. Story 4. The Hunting Incident. Jake Thornton had been hunting these woods since he was 8 years old, taught by his father and his father before him. He knew every deer trail, every good stand location, every place where the elk came down from the high country. So when he saw the tracks, he knew immediately that something was wrong. They were too large to be deer, too narrow to be elk. 4-toed with a strange dragging mark between the prints, as if whatever made them was trailing something along the ground. The tracks were fresh, less than an hour old, judging by the moisture still visible in the compressed dirt. Jake checked his rifle and followed. The tracks led him deeper into the woods than he usually hunted, past the marked trails and into the old growth, where the trees grew so thick the sky disappeared. The silence was absolute. No bird calls, no squirrel chatter, no rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. Just silence and those tracks, leading him forward with the inevitability of a story that could only end one way. He found the first body at noon. It was strung up in a tree, hung from a branch by something that had been driven through its chest, something like a spike or a spear, except it was organic, bone-white, and ridged like an insect's leg. The body was Gary Hutchins, a local bow hunter. Jake had seen him at the supply store just 3 days ago, comparing arrow tips and talking about the big buck he'd spotted near Mitchell's Creek. Gary was empty, not dead, not murdered, but empty. His skin intact, but hanging loose, like a suit that had been carefully removed and then rehung. Every drop of blood was gone. Even his eyes were deflated, collapsed inward like punctured balloons. Jake's hands shook as he pulled out his sat phone. No signal. Of course, no signal. These woods were a dead zone. Everyone knew that. He'd have to get back to the truck, call the sheriff, get a search team out here. He turned to go and saw it standing between the trees. At first glance, it looked like a horse, white coat, long neck, 4 legs. But horses didn't stand like that, didn't hold their bodies at that angle. This thing was too tall, too narrow, and its legs bent wrong, the joints articulating in ways that made Jake's eyes hurt to follow. And the head was small and featureless, just a rounded dome with 2 black dots for eyes. But from the front of its face, hanging down like some obscene mockery of a tongue, was a proboscis, 4 feet long, tubular, tapering to a needle-fine point. It swayed slightly as the creature breathed, and even from 20 feet away, Jake could see the blood crusted around its tip. They stared at each other, man and creature, hunter and hunter. Jake raised his rifle slowly, chambering around as quietly as he could manage. The creature's head tilted, tracking the movement. Those black dot eyes showed no emotion, no fear, nothing. They were blank as a doll's eyes. He fired. The shot was perfect. Center, mass, the kind of shot he'd made 1,000 times. The creature staggered, a spray of something dark and viscous bursting from its side. But it didn't fall. Instead, it made a sound. A high-pitched, screaming whistle that cut through the silence like a knife and turned Jake's blood to ice water. Then it charged. Nothing that size should have moved that fast. 1 second it was 20 feet away. The next it was on him. That proboscis lancing forward with the speed of a striking snake. Jake threw himself sideways, hitting the ground hard, feeling something whip past his head close enough to ruffle his hair. He rolled, coming up with the rifle ready, and fired again and again. Each shot hit, each one spraying that dark fluid, but the creature just kept coming. It wasn't just attacking, it was furious, making that screaming whistle sound continuously, a noise that felt like it was drilling into Jake's skull and scrambling his thoughts. The proboscis struck his shoulder, punching through his hunting jacket and the flesh beneath with almost no resistance. Jake felt the tip hit bone, felt it scraping, searching, and then, oh God, he felt it begin to draw. The suction was immediate and horrible. He could feel his blood being pulled up through that tube, feel it rushing out of his body in pulsing waves. His vision grayed at the edges, his strength vanished like water through a sieve. He'd heard about hypovolemic shock in his EMT training, knew the symptoms, and he was experiencing all of them at once. With the last of his strength, Jake pulled his hunting knife and drove it into the creature's small head. The thing released him immediately, thrashing backward with the knife embedded in its skull. The proboscis whipped wildly, spraying blood, Jake's blood, across the trees and undergrowth. The creature stumbled, that whistle becoming a gurgle, its legs buckling. Jake tried to stand but couldn't. He'd lost too much blood, his body refusing to respond to commands. He could only watch as the creature collapsed onto its side, legs still twitching, proboscis curling and uncurling spasmodically. It took 15 minutes to die. Jake timed it on his watch because it was the only thing he could still do. Watch the second hand tick, watch the creature's movement slow, and finally stop. He must have passed out eventually, because when he opened his eyes again, the sun was setting, and his shoulder was a mass of agony. The creature was still there, dead and cooling, looking even more wrong in death than it had in life. Jake's phone had signal suddenly, as if the creature's death had lifted some kind of interference. He called 911 with fingers that barely worked, gave them his GPS coordinates, and then lay back to wait. The paramedics found him 3 hours later, delirious from blood loss and hypothermia. They found Gary's body too, and 2 others that Jake hadn't seen, both hung in trees, both empty. But when they came back the next day to collect the creature's body, it was gone, not dragged away. There were no tracks, not scavenged, no feeding signs, just gone, as if it had never existed. The only evidence was Jake's blood soaking into the ground and the knife he'd left embedded in its skull, lying clean and unused in a pile of dead leaves. Jake quit hunting after that, sold his rifles, his gear, everything. When people asked why, he told them he'd just lost interest. But late at night, when the house was quiet, he'd stand at his window and stare into the tree line at the edge of his property. And sometimes, on nights when the moon was dark and the wind was still, he'd see something white moving between the trees, something tall and wrong, with a proboscis swaying like a cobra preparing to strike. The needle was still out there, still hunting, and Jake knew with the certainty of a man who'd looked death in the face and somehow survived, that it remembered him, that it was patient, that it was waiting, just waiting. Story 5, The County Fair. The Mascot suit had been in the storage unit for 3 years, forgotten among boxes of old fair equipment and dusty carnival decorations. When Tommy Reeves found it, he thought it was his lucky day. The fair's regular Mascot performer had quit with only 2 days' notice, and here was a perfectly good costume just sitting unused. It was a weird design, bright blue fur, big mismatched googly eyes, 2 floppy antennae sprouting from its head. The mouth was stitched into a permanent smile that looked more unsettling than friendly, but beggars couldn't be choosers, and Tommy needed the money. He tried it on in the unit's dim lighting. The interior was cramped and stuffy, smelling of old sweat and something else, something sweet and rotten that reminded him of the time a rat had died in his apartment walls. The head was tight, too tight, pressing against his skull in a way that made his teeth ache. "Good enough," he muttered, his voice muffled by the fabric. The first day went fine. Tommy waved at kids, posed for photos, did the usual Mascot routine. But the suit was uncomfortable in a way that went beyond simple stuffiness. It felt tight, constricting, as if it were slowly shrinking around him. And the smell, that sweet, rotten smell, seemed to get stronger as the day went on. By evening, he was eager to get out of the suit. He reached for the zipper at the back of the neck. It wouldn't move. Tommy pulled harder, feeling panic start to flutter in his chest. The zipper was stuck, or broken, or something. It simply wouldn't budge. He tried the emergency releases at the sides, the ones that were supposed to make it possible to get out, even if the main zipper failed. They were gone. Not broken, gone. Just smooth fabric where the releases should have been. "Okay," he said aloud, trying to calm himself. "Okay, this is fine, just need to get some help." He stumbled out of the storage shed behind the funnel cake stand, looking for one of the other workers. The fair was closing down for the night, lights shutting off section by section, creating pools of shadow that seemed to move and breathe. That's when he felt it. Movement inside the suit. Not his movement, something else. A shifting, writhing sensation against his skin, as if the fabric had come alive. Tommy screamed, clawing at the suit, trying to tear it off, but his hands couldn't find purchase. The fabric was too smooth, too slippery, and his fingers kept sliding off. The tightness increased. He felt the suit constricting around his chest, making it hard to breathe. The head pressed harder against his skull, and Tommy realized with mounting horror that he could feel his skin starting to merge with the interior fabric, not touching it, merging with it. The boundary between his flesh and the suit dissolving like tissue paper in water. He ran. Didn't know where he was going, didn't care, just ran through the darkened fairgrounds, past the silent rides and shuttered game booths. His vision was graying at the edges, consciousness fragmenting, as whatever was happening to him accelerated. The last thing Tommy felt was intense heat, as if his body were cooking from the inside out. His skin was liquefying, his organs breaking down, his bones softening like overcooked meat. He tried to scream, but his mouth was full of blue fur, his tongue swelling and dissolving simultaneously. And then there was nothing. Just the suit, standing alone in the middle of the fairgrounds, no longer empty. They found the body 3 days later, after parents complained about the smell, near the tilt-a-whirl. By then, Tommy was unrecognizable, a shriveled, desiccated thing inside the Mascot suit, his face twisted into an expression of terminal agony. The medical examiner couldn't determine cause of death. Heat stroke, maybe, or some kind of rapid dehydration. But that didn't explain the decay, which was far too advanced for the timeline. And it didn't explain why the suit couldn't be removed. It had literally fused to the corpse, becoming one entity. They burned the thing, suit and all. 3 months later, a new mascot appeared at a children's party in Indianapolis. Same blue fur, same mismatched eyes, same unsettling smile. But this one was bigger, much bigger. 15 feet tall, towering over the kids who ran screaming when they saw what was inside its mouth. The police report from the incident is heavily redacted, but witnesses describe something horrible visible through the mascot's gaping smile. A human head, rotted and collapsed, but still recognizable. Still wearing the same expression of agony that Tommy Reeves had died with. The creature had killed 2 people at that party before it disappeared. Both bodies were found later, dragged across 3 miles of suburban streets, leaving trails of blood that the morning rain washed away. They were torn apart, systematically dismantled as if by something conducting an autopsy. Mr. Mascot, as the media eventually dubbed it, has been spotted 17 times since then, always wearing that same blue suit, always impossibly large. It appears at fairs, at parties, at school functions, places where mascots belong, where they wouldn't seem out of place, until you see what's in its mouth. Theories abound about what it is. A reanimated corpse driven by some unknown pathogen, a creature that learned to wear human skin like a disguise. Or maybe it's exactly what it appears to be, a mascot costume that refused to let its wearer leave. The suit is still out there, still walking, still smiling. And if you see it at your next company picnic or county fair, look very carefully at what's visible through that gaping mouth. Because that rotted, twisted thing inside might be someone you knew, might be someone who thought they were just doing a job, might be you next time. Story 6, The Wrong Moon. Emily couldn't sleep. Again, the insomnia had started 3 weeks ago, right after they'd moved into the new house. Her parents said it was just adjustment anxiety, that she'd get used to the new place. But Emily knew better. It was the moon, their bedroom window. She shared it with her little sister Anna, faced directly east, and every night the moon would rise and shine directly through the glass. That would have been fine, except the moon was wrong. It was too bright, for one thing. Bright enough to read by, bright enough to make shadows sharp and distinct even at midnight. And it was too low. Instead of hanging high in the sky like it should, this moon seemed to hover just above the roofline, close enough that Emily sometimes thought she could reach out and touch it. But worst of all was the face. The moon had always had a face, of course. The man in the moon, the rabbit, whatever pattern you wanted to see in its craters. But this face was different. It was unmistakably human, with features so clear and distinct that Emily could see its expression. It was smiling at her. Night after night, Emily would wake to find that huge, bright moon hanging outside her window, its face turned toward the house, that smile stretching wide. And each night it seemed to come a little closer, a little lower, until she could make out details that the moon should never have, eyes that tracked her movement, teeth visible in that too wide smile. She told her parents. They looked out the window, saw the moon, and assured her it was perfectly normal. "It's just a full moon, honey. Nothing to be afraid of." But they couldn't see what she saw, or they didn't want to. Anna saw it, though. Emily's 6-year-old sister had stopped sleeping in their room, preferring to drag her blankets into the hallway closet every night. "The moon man watches," she'd whispered to Emily one morning. "He wants to come in." On the 23rd night, Emily woke to find Anna standing at the window. "Anna?" she whispered. "Get away from there." Her sister didn't respond. She was staring up at the moon, which was closer than Emily had ever seen it, close enough that she could see the texture of its surface, could see that what looked like craters from a distance were actually hollows in skin, and what looked like ridges were actually bones pressing against stretched flesh. The face was smiling wider than should have been possible. Its eyes, no longer distant lights but actual eyes, massive and dark, were locked on Anna. "Anna, come back to bed, now." Anna raised her hand and waved at the moon. It waved back. Emily screamed. The sound brought her parents running, but by the time they burst into the room, the moon had retreated to its normal distance. Anna was back in bed, confused about why everyone was upset. And when Emily tried to explain what she'd seen, her parents exchanged those looks, the kind of looks that meant they were worried about her, not the moon. The next night, Emily made sure Anna slept in her parents' room. She'd keep watch herself, maybe get proof with her phone camera. But when midnight came and the moon rose, her phone's camera wouldn't work. The screen would just show static, the image fracturing and pixelating whenever she tried to photograph that smiling face. The moon was definitely closer tonight. Close enough that Emily could see the limbs now, impossibly long, impossibly thin, stretching down from the spherical head moon, reaching toward the house like the legs of some cosmic spider. They moved slowly, bending at joints that shouldn't exist, and where they touched the roof, Emily heard a scratching sound like fingernails on wood. One limb reached her window and tapped. Emily dove under her covers, heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. She squeezed her eyes shut and tried to pretend this wasn't happening, that the tapping wasn't getting louder, that she couldn't hear the window sliding open despite the fact that she'd locked it. The temperature in the room plummeted. Emily could see her breath fogging in the air beneath the blankets, and then she heard it. Breathing. Slow, deep breaths from something massive, something that shouldn't need to breathe at all. She peeked out from under the blanket. The moon face was pressed against her window, filling the entire frame. The smile was close enough to count the teeth now, row after row of them, human teeth but too many, too perfectly white. The eyes were pits of absolute darkness that seemed to contain their own gravity, pulling at Emily's gaze, making it hard to look away, and then it winked. Emily bolted. She ran from the room down the hall into her parents' bedroom. She woke them in a panic, dragged them back to her room to show them the thing at the window, but it was gone. The moon hung in the sky at its normal distance, just a regular moon. The window was closed and locked. Everything was perfectly ordinary, except for the frost. The entire window was covered in a thick layer of ice, and pressed into the frost like a handprint in snow was the outline of a face. The smile stretched impossibly wide, etched into the ice in crystal clear detail. Emily's father got very quiet when he saw it. He went to his study and came back with an old newspaper article, yellowed and fragile. It was from 1987, about a family who had lived in this same house. Their 7-year-old daughter had vanished one night. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of foul play. The window to her bedroom had been found wide open despite the parents swearing they'd locked it. The girl had been babbling about the moon for weeks before she disappeared, about how it watched her, about how it was coming closer. They never found her body. "We're leaving," Emily's father said. "We're packing tonight, and we're leaving." But it was already too late. Anna was gone from their bed. The door to the hallway stood open, and through it, Emily could see the front door, also open, swinging gently in a breeze that shouldn't exist. And beyond the door, in the street, she could see something massive bending down from the sky. The moon was there, impossibly low, impossibly close. Its limbs were wrapped around Anna's small form, lifting her gently, almost tenderly, up toward that smiling face. Anna wasn't struggling. She was laughing, reaching for the moon like a child reaching for a parent. Emily ran. She ran through the door, down the porch steps, into the street. She was screaming Anna's name, screaming for her sister to come back. But Anna was already too high, already being pulled into that smiling mouth that stretched open like a hangar door. The last thing Emily saw before the moon took Anna completely was her sister's face. Anna was smiling the same smile as the moon, her eyes reflecting nothing, becoming those same dark pits. And then she was gone. The moon retreated slowly, leisurely, back to its place in the sky. By the time the police arrived, called by neighbors who'd heard the screaming, it looked completely normal. Just the moon doing what moons do. They never found Anna. She was listed as a runaway, despite the fact that a 6-year-old couldn't possibly run far, despite the fact that every door and window in the house had been locked from the inside, despite Emily's frantic insistence that something had taken her, something with a smile and too many teeth. Emily doesn't sleep anymore. She stays in her room at the psychiatric facility where her parents eventually admitted her, and she keeps the curtains drawn always, because even during the day she can feel it watching. Even when the moon shouldn't be visible, she knows it's there, waiting, watching, smiling. And one night, maybe tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe years from now, it will come back for her. Just like it came back for all the other children who'd seen its face, who'd met its gaze, who'd learned too late that some things in the sky shouldn't be looked at directly. The moon is always watching. And sometimes, when you stare up at it long enough, you realize something horrible. It's staring back. Story 7. The Rot That Walks. The smell hit Dr. Sarah Chen before she even got out of her car. It was the smell of death, not fresh death, but old death, the kind that's been rotting in summer heat for weeks, the kind that makes your eyes water and your throat close up in automatic rejection. Jesus Christ, her partner, Miguel Santos, gagged into his sleeve. What the hell died out here? They were 50 miles outside Portland, called to investigate reports of a potential biohazard in a rural area. Hikers had reported seeing something wrong in the woods, and when the first responding officers got sick just from approaching the site, the CDC had been called in. Sarah pulled on her hazmat suit with practiced efficiency, checking the seals twice. Miguel did the same, though his hands were shaking. This was his first real field deployment, and she could see the nervousness in his eyes. By the book, she told him. We assess, we sample, we extract. Don't touch anything without calling it out first. They followed the trail into the woods. The smell got worse with every step, and Sarah noticed something disturbing. There was no wildlife, no birds, no insects, not even the distant chatter of squirrels. Just silence and that overwhelming smell of decomposition. They found it in a clearing about a mile in. At first, Sarah thought it was a corpse, a body that had been dead for weeks, bloated and putrid. But then it moved. The thing lurched forward with a wet, sliding sound, and Sarah realized with mounting horror that this wasn't a corpse at all. It was still alive. The entity was vaguely humanoid, roughly man-shaped, but grotesquely distorted. Its skin was the color of week-old meat, mottled with patches of green and black where rot had set in. The body was barely holding together. She could see exposed muscle through splits in the skin, could see things moving beneath the surface. Maggots, thousands of them, writhing through the flesh like living veins. But worst of all were the flies. They covered the thing in a living coat, a buzzing cloud so thick that the actual shape beneath was hard to make out. And the sound, God, the sound of thousands of wings beating in unison was like a physical pressure against Sarah's eardrums, even through the hazmat suit. The thing's face, if you could call it that, turned toward them. What might have once been eyes were now just hollow pits crawling with larvae. The mouth hung open, slack and dripping, and Sarah could see the maggots spilling out like a grotesque waterfall. "Back to the car," she said quietly. "Slowly, don't run." But Miguel was already running. The thing lurched after him with surprising speed. For something that looked like it should barely be able to stand, it moved with horrible purpose. The fly cloud expanded, reaching forward like grasping hands, and Sarah saw Miguel stumble as the first of them reached him. "Miguel, the suit, check your—" But it was too late. Miguel was screaming, clawing at his hazmat hood. The flies had found a gap somewhere, a tear she hadn't noticed, and they were pouring in. She could see them crawling across his face through the clear plastic, could see him swatting at them uselessly as they burrowed into his ears, his nose, his mouth. And then he stopped screaming. Miguel stood up slowly, unnaturally straight. His movements were jerky, puppet-like. Through his hood, Sarah could see his face changing, skin going gray, eyes clouding over. He turned toward her, and his mouth opened impossibly wide, flies pouring out in a black stream. Sarah ran. She didn't remember most of the run back. Her mind had retreated to some protected place where it didn't have to process what she'd seen, what Miguel had become. She just ran, branches tearing at her suit, breath fogging the interior of her hood. She made it to the car and locked the doors, hands shaking so badly she could barely get the key in the ignition. As she peeled out, tires spitting gravel, she looked in the rearview mirror. Both figures were standing at the edge of the tree line, watching her leave. The fly-blown thing and Miguel, or what used to be Miguel, standing side by side, waiting. Sarah drove straight to the CDC field office and reported everything. A containment team was assembled immediately, full NBC protocols, flamethrowers, the works. They went in at dawn, prepared for anything. They found nothing. The clearing was empty. No sign of the entity. No sign of Miguel. Not even the expected amount of normal woodland decay. Just empty forest, and a smell that lingered for months afterward. A smell that seeped into the ground itself. But 3 weeks later, the first missing persons report came in. A hiker vanished without a trace on a trail 40 miles from the original site. Then another, then 3 more. Each time, witnesses reported seeing someone who looked sick, seeing a cloud of flies, smelling something terrible. The pattern spread. Portland first, then Seattle, then down the coast to San Francisco. Always moving, always spreading, and the descriptions were always the same. A walking corpse, a cloud of flies, and a smell that made you want to die just to escape it. Sarah tracked it obsessively, plotting the sightings on a map, trying to predict where it would appear next. She became convinced that it was targeting her specifically, that it knew she'd escaped, that it wanted her back. And maybe she was right, because 6 months after her encounter, she woke up one night to the smell. That smell in her apartment, in her bedroom. She turned on the light with trembling hands. Miguel was standing at the foot of her bed, or what remained of Miguel. His hazmat suit was rotted away, hanging in tatters from a body that was mostly bones and maggots now. But he was still standing, still moving. And when he opened his mouth, the flies poured out like a visible breath. Sarah felt it immediately, a tickling in her throat, a heaviness in her lungs. She coughed, and something small and black came out. She coughed again, harder, and more followed. Flies. Dozens of them crawling up her throat from the inside. She was already infected, had been since that day in the woods probably. The flies had gotten in somehow, so small she'd never noticed, and they'd been gestating inside her ever since, growing, multiplying, waiting. Sarah looked down at her hands. The skin was starting to look gray, starting to feel loose. When she touched her face, her finger went through the cheek, punching through rotted flesh that hadn't seemed rotten moments before. Miguel tilted his head, and through the buzzing of the flies, Sarah heard something that might have been laughter. The transformation took 3 days. Sarah felt every second of it, felt her organs liquefying, felt the maggots eating her from the inside out, felt her consciousness fragmenting as the rot reached her brain. By the end, she wasn't Sarah Chen anymore. She was just another host, another shambling thing wrapped in flies and hunger. They found her apartment empty, door standing open. Neighbors reported the smell, reported seeing something leaving the building in the early morning hours, something surrounded by a dark cloud that buzzed and hummed. The case was never solved. But if you're hiking in the Pacific Northwest and you smell something rotten on the wind, don't investigate. Don't try to find the source. Just leave. Run if you have to, because the fly-blown is still out there, still spreading, still adding to its numbers. And once you smell it, once that scent gets in your lungs, you're already infected, already dying, already becoming part of the swarm that walks and hunts and spreads its rot to everything it touches. The transformation is slow enough that you'll think you're fine. You'll go about your life, go home to your family, go to work, and all the while, the flies will be growing inside you, eating you hollow, preparing you for the day when you wake up and realize you're not you anymore. You're just another corpse that hasn't stopped walking yet. Story 8, The Last Broadcast. The email came through at 3:47 a.m. Urgent, unexplained signal interference in the northwest sectors. Multiple towers reporting complete loss of all cellular and data transmission. Origin unknown. Please investigate immediately. David Rashid, senior telecommunications engineer, stared at his laptop screen in the darkness of his bedroom. Beside him, his wife Sarah slept peacefully, unaware that her husband was about to make the worst decision of his life. He should have delegated it, should have sent a junior tech to investigate. But David was thorough, maybe obsessively so, and unexplained signal loss across an entire region was the kind of problem that fascinated him. Besides, he'd be able to bill overtime. The first tower was in a rural area an hour outside the city. David arrived just after dawn, diagnostic equipment rattling in the back of his van. The tower itself appeared normal, no visible damage, no weather-related issues. But his instruments showed something impossible. The signal wasn't just lost, it was being absorbed. Every frequency, every band, every transmission, all of it was being pulled into a specific point about 2 miles northwest. The readings looked like a communications black hole. David followed the signal drain. The Forest Service road was barely passable, forcing David to drive at a crawl over potholes and washouts. His GPS lost signal about a mile in, the screen fragmenting into static before going dark. Then his phone. Then even his AM radio, which had been playing the morning news, dissolved into white noise. He should have turned back then, but David was already imagining the paper he'd write about this phenomenon, the conference presentations, the career advancement. He kept driving. The trees opened into a clearing and David stopped the van, his mouth falling open. There was something in the center of the clearing, something that hurt to look at directly, something that made his eyes water and his head pound. It was roughly humanoid in shape, but that was where any resemblance to humanity ended. The thing was massive, at least 60 feet tall, maybe more. Its body seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously, phasing between solid and translucent, real and unreal. Where its skin should have been was something that looked like static, like television snow given physical form. And from every part of it, in waves that David could almost see, radio frequencies poured out. Not broadcast, absorbed, and then rebroadcast, changed, corrupted. David's engineering training let him understand what he was seeing on some level. This thing was a living signal processor, pulling in every electromagnetic transmission for miles and transforming it into something else. His diagnostic equipment went haywire, needles pegging into the red, screen showing readings that should have been impossible. David grabbed his notepad with shaking hands and started writing observations, scientific, training overriding his survival instinct. That's when he noticed the phones. They were everywhere around the clearing, hundreds of them, thousands maybe. Cell phones of every make and model, from ancient flip phones to the latest smartphones, scattered across the ground in rough concentric circles. All of them had their screens facing upward, all of them showing the same thing, static, pure white noise, but with something moving in it if you looked closely, shapes, faces. David picked up the nearest phone. It was an iPhone, relatively new, the case decorated with stickers. A name was written on the back in permanent marker, Chloe Winters. The screen showed static, but as David stared at it, the static began to resolve into an image, a face. A young woman screaming silently from within the noise, her mouth opening and closing in desperate pleas that produced no sound. David dropped the phone. He picked up another face. This one, a middle-aged man. Another phone, a teenager. Another, an elderly woman. Every phone contained someone, trapped somehow in the signal, imprisoned in the electromagnetic spectrum. He looked at the creature again, really looked at it, and this time he saw the tendrils. They were extending from its body into the ground, seeking, searching. And where they touched the phones, the static on the screens would flare brighter. The faces would scream harder. It was feeding on them, or through them, or maybe they were part of it now, their consciousnesses downloaded into pure signal, existing as nothing but data in this thing's incomprehensible biology. David's own phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out with numb fingers. The screen was showing static now too, but different from the others. This static was moving toward him, reaching for him through the screen like a living thing. He threw the phone away and ran for his van. The engine wouldn't start. David turned the key again and again, pumping the gas, but the van was completely dead. The radio came on by itself, blaring static so loud it hurt. The GPS screen flickered to life, showing static. Even the analog gauges on the dashboard, the oil pressure, the temperature, their needles were dancing randomly, impossibly, as if even mechanical systems were being affected. Through the windshield, David saw the creature moving. It was turning toward him with movements that seemed to skip frames, like a video with missing data. The tendrils were extending, reaching across the clearing with terrible purpose. David abandoned the van and ran into the woods. Behind him, he heard a sound like 1,000 radio stations tuning simultaneously, overlapping voices and music and noise, all compressed into a single overwhelming cacophony. He ran for hours, or maybe minutes. Time seemed to distort in the presence of that thing. When he finally stopped, gasping and dizzy, he was completely lost. Every tree looked the same. The sun was hidden behind clouds that seemed to pulse with static. His watch had stopped at 3:47, the same time he'd received the initial email. The hands weren't moving, but the digital display was cycling through random numbers and symbols that shouldn't have been in its character set. David's pocket buzzed, his phone. He'd thrown it away, but here it was, back in his pocket. The screen showed static, and in that static, he could see his own face. Not a reflection, his face from the outside, as if he were looking at himself through a camera. He watched as his static self opened his mouth, watched as his jaw unhinged impossibly wide, watched as his own face on the screen began to scream. And then he felt it, a pulling sensation, a tugging at something essential inside him. His vision began to fragment at the edges, pixelating like a corrupted image file. The world around him started to look less real, more like a broadcast, like he was watching reality through a screen rather than living in it. David tried to scream, but no sound came out, or rather the sound came out wrong, as static, as white noise, as the hiss between radio stations. He looked down at his hands and saw they were starting to flicker, to phase between solid and transparent. He was being absorbed, turned into signal, compressed into the electromagnetic spectrum. The last thing David saw before his consciousness fragmented completely was the creature standing in the clearing, its body pulsing with stolen frequencies. It wasn't hunting him. It wasn't even aware of him as an individual. He was just data to be processed, consciousness to be absorbed. Another voice to add to the infinite scream of static that comprised its existence. David Rashid was reported missing 3 days later. Search teams found his van in the clearing, instruments still running, displays showing impossible readings, but David was gone. His phone was there sitting on the dashboard, screen showing static. If you pick up that phone and watch the static long enough, you might see him. David Rashid, senior telecommunications engineer, still screaming silently from within the white noise, trying desperately to warn someone, anyone, about what's waiting in the northwest sectors, about the thing that feeds on signals, about the creature that takes consciousness and compresses it into static, storing it like data, keeping it alive in electromagnetic purgatory forever. The telecommunications company sealed off that area, put up fences, hired security, filed the incident under equipment failure. They still can't use those towers, though. Any signal that goes through that region comes back changed, corrupted. Sometimes people hear voices in the static, voices begging for help, voices that sound like friends, family members, people who went missing and were never found. The creature is still there, still absorbing, still growing. And every year, a few more phones appear in that clearing. Every year, a few more faces join the chorus trapped in the static. Every year, the interference spreads a little further. The signal loss affects a few more towers. One day, maybe soon, it will reach your phone. You'll be scrolling through social media or checking your email, and the screen will flicker, just for a second. Just long enough for you to see something moving in the pixels, something looking back at you from the other side of the screen. And when that happens, you'll understand what David understood too late. The signal isn't dead. It's just waiting for you to answer. Did you like the stories? If so, comment which is your favorite. That's all I have in store for tonight. Thank you for sticking this far. Good night.